PP 120, Chapter 9, Nerves, Reflexes, and Meninges. All right, so a nerve. We've been talking about nerves in the peripheral nervous system, and it is bundles of axons bound up by connective tissue. And of course, nerves are only in the peripheral nervous system. So for instance, here we have a nerve, and we can see it in cross-section. There's a sheet of connective tissue going around the outside of the nerve called the epineurium. Within the neuron are bundles of fascicles as well as blood vessels. Then each fascicle is surrounded by a sheet of connective tissue called the perineurium. And then the fascicle is bundles of axons, and each axon is surrounded by its own sheet of connective tissue called the endoneurium. And the endoneurium is going around both the axon and the myelin sheath. Also worth noting that an axon plus myelin sheath is often called a nerve fiber. So again, this arrangement should seem familiar from the muscular system. Epineurium around the entire nerve, perineurium around the fascicle, and endoneurium around the nerve fiber. Bundles of bundles of bundles. All right, types of nerves. Well, surprise, surprise, there are sensory nerves. Sensory nerves are bringing information to the central nervous system and made exclusively of sensory neurons. The axons of sensory neurons compose sensory nerves. Motor nerves. Surprise, surprise, motor nerves carry impulses from the central nervous system to the effectors in different parts of the body. They are made of the axons of motor neurons. And it's only motor neurons in motor nerves. Then the third kind, and actually the most common, is mixed nerves. Mixed nerves have both sensory and motor nerve fibers. So they're both bringing information to the central nervous system and sending commands out to the body. So the way that impulses tend to travel is through what's called a reflex arc. So you have the receptor, which then sends the signal to the sensory neuron. Sometimes the receptor is the sensory neuron. Signal arrives in the central nervous system, where it is processed by various interneurons, and then a response is sent out via the motor neurons to the effector, which is muscle tissue or a gland. Now, a reflex is automatic response. So the stimuli occurred, the reflex happens no matter what. It does not need the brain necessarily to occur. Thinking is not needed. And reflexes are important to help maintain homeostasis, maintain that stable internal environment. Some examples include vomiting, sneezing, swallowing, kicking. There's quite a few out there. Of course, the patellar reflex, the doctor hits the patellar ligament with the rubber hammer. This will stretch the proper muscles, the quadriceps femoris muscle group. There's the sensory receptor in there that will then send the signal up the sensory neuron to the central nervous system. And then that will synapse with a motor neuron to carry the response to the quadriceps femoris group, leading to the kicking. So the effector causes the kicking motion. So what's composing this patellar reflex arc? 2 neurons and an effector. And that's it. The withdrawal reflex is slightly more complicated. So withdrawal reflex, you do something that hurts a part of your body and you pull away. So for instance, you step on a tack. The receptor, which happens to be the sensory neuron, will detect this damage and send a signal through the sensory neuron to the central nervous system. It will then synapse with a interneuron, and then the interneuron will synapse with the motor neuron. The motor neuron will then carry the response, the command, to the relevant muscles to pull away from the source of pain. So withdrawal reflex arc, 3 neurons, and the effectors. All right, moving on to the meninges. The meninges are actual, easy to see connective tissue structures that surround the brain and spinal cord. So they are made up of connective tissues of different types. They lie between the bones of the skull or vertebral column and the soft tissues of the brain or spinal cord. And it turns out there are 3 layers. There are 3 meninges. So the Most superficial meninge is the dura mater. Dura mater sort of shown here. The dura mater is very tough, dense connective tissue that surrounds the entire area and is close to or adjacent to the bones. Often blood vessels run along the dura mater. In the vertebral column, there's a space called the epidural space that is between the dura mater and the vertebra. That space isn't empty though, it's filled with blood vessels, nerves, and adipose tissue. In the skull, there is no epidural space. Instead, the dura mater is directly in contact with the skull. So here is the skull. In the skull, the meninges, the dura mater, also form veins called dural veins. So they make the dura mater actually splits in certain locations in the skull, forming an area where blood can flow. And again, as I mentioned before, the skull does not normally have epidural space. It only forms if there's some damage. All right, after the deep to the dura mater is the arachnoid mater. Arachnoid mater lies adjacent to the dura mater. It is also dense connective tissue, but it's thinner than the dura mater. And then underneath or deep to the arachnoid mater is the subarachnoid space. The subarachnoid space is where you will find the cerebral spinal fluid. Cerebral spinal fluid, very important because it surrounds the spinal cord and the brain, helps to buoy them in place so they don't rest on the hard bones, protects them from injury by providing a cushion. So cerebral spinal fluid, very important. And then the pia mater. The pia mater is the deepest meninge, and it lies on the surface of the brain or spinal cord. It's extremely thin, transparent, and much more delicate than the other two. So here is another way of seeing the meninges. So again, here is the vertebra, here's the epidural space, then you have the dura mater. Adjacent to the dura mater is the arachnoid mater. Then you have the subarachnoid space where you find the cerebral spinal fluid, and then the pia mater lying on the surface of the spinal cord. That's the arrangement of the meninges. And that is it for this part of chapter 9.